Well, welcome back to Exceptionally
Average
with Craig and Steve. It is good to be back with you. Took a little bit of a break there, just coming off of this summer. How you been, Steve?
Been really good. It's been a great summer. Boy, it goes fast, doesn't it?
It really has. We are recording this the end of September. Be dropping in early October. We're hoping to get these more regular for our listeners, but it's going to be a little bit easier on our schedule, though. You were just gone for a whole week for work. I leave for Honduras next week, so I don't know. Maybe our schedules are just crazy. But
we're going to do what we can, and we're going to make the best of it and try to make it as consistent as possible, right?
And tonight, we have a fun topic. I think it's fun. Other people might think it's weird, but I actually think either way, whether you think it's fun or weird, it's actually really important. Sure. And it's about death. Yeah. And that might seem like a weird topic, but I think about death all the time. Why? Because last week I did a funeral, and I stood in front of this gentleman's casket, and I preached a funeral with his dead body right behind me. And that was my reality just last week. And so that is, as a pastor, we are, I don't want to say, numb to death, but we are very comfortable with it because we realize it's coming for all of us. We all have it in common. But I believe as men and women who are in Christ and trying to make the most out of their life, I mean, if they're listening to this podcast, it's going to be people that are probably trying to take their life seriously, try and better themselves. Knowing what you want said about you when you die, and maybe towards the end, knowing what you don't want said about you when you die, if you're not living that reality now, you're not going to get there.
No, you're definitely not. I mean, you have to do the things that support the end goal, right? If you keep with the end in mind, which is what you just said, and that's kind of how I work. That's my job every day. I put together training with the end in mind. I say, what do you want this to look like in the end? And then from there, we work backwards to be able to support that objective. We do the same things in our lives every day, and if we're not, we should be.
We do it with our 401k or our Roths, your investment account. Your advisor says, what are your goals? How do you want to live when you retire?
Right. What does that look like? And then you work backwards to say, okay, this is the amount that I need to save, put in the bank or put in investments over the period of time starting right now. And so that's an important thing to do. And it's not just for your financials or your health, it's for your end goal. I mean, your end goal.
Because to be honest, when you die, you take nothing with you. So what is said about you is pretty much what you left on this earth.
That's right.
And so you're not taking the Cadillac, you're not taking the pontoon boat, you're not taking Frank, your bulldog, none of that can come. But what your spouse, your kids, your community, your friends say about you, or maybe are able to not say about you in a good way, like they don't say about you, that is really what you leave on this earth.
You leave a legacy. You leave the memory, and you leave the lessons learned, the examples that you may or may not have provided. And from those, people learn from whether those examples were good or bad.
Yeah. So we're going to break it down for our listeners in a few different ways. I want to ask, what do you want your wife to say about you? What do you want your kids to say about you? And then what would you want your friends and stuff to say about you? And we'll both answer those, but let's just dive in. Steve, you and Jill have been married how long?
28 years.
28 years. You're going to live to 100. She'll probably live to 105. You're both in good shape, but we'll just guesstimate that Jill's probably going to outlive you. We'll play the averages. She'll soon pass of a broken heart after, but she's going to speak at your funeral first. What do you want your bride to say about you? What would you want her to say?
That's a great question. And, I have to say, if I'm like any other man out there, oftentimes I stop myself short of that conversation because, let's face it, as men or as human beings in general, death is a hard thing to think about. Yeah. It's uncomfortable, but we have to be willing to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations because that uncomfortable is also an eventual reality, right? So you have to consider it. It has to be part of your conversation with yourself and your relationship with God and say, what do I want this to look like in the end? If I were to answer that question regarding my wife, what do I want her to say about me? I guess the biggest thing I would hope for is he loved me when I was unlovable. He loved me relentlessly. He loved me when others saw the worst in me. And that is so powerful to be able to look past our individual flaws. Now, as husband and wife, and I think we all can share this, one of the first things that we joke about or recognize sometimes is our spouse's flaws. Yeah. However, if you can love beyond that, then all of a sudden you recognize that this is true Christian love, what Christ meant.
Self-sacrificial.
Self-sacrificial, that's exactly right. And so I want that because we've been through many challenges together. And Jill and I, there's nothing that's conquered us. And not because of our own doing, but because we've invited a third party to be included in that, and that is Christ, right? And so we lean into that quite often. But I would want her to say that. He loved me past my flaws, through my flaws, when others couldn't. But I also want to be recognized as a faithful servant of God and a leader that carries that out in his household. And those things are very important to me because if I've accomplished those two things, Craig, I'm successful. Yeah. I need nothing else. How about you?
Yeah, I think I want her to be able to say he was a good leader of our home. Not perfect.
Right.
Good. Because I really try and live that out. You know, and again, I know people, the popularity of stuff like that. If you ask my wife, she would say, no, he's supposed to be the leader of our home. So he better, like, she looks at me like that. So I better be a good leader. And what that means is I hope that I made time for her. I hope I cared for her. And that would be the other thing. I hope she would always say, I knew that I was always his number one. I'm really clear with that with our kids. Like, so when they're being mean, I'll always be like, stop talking to my wife like that.
I've said that too.
Like, I don't say your mom. Right. Like, I'm like, that's my wife. And I wouldn't let anyone belittle her the way the 6-year-old can do that sometimes. And I'm like, if a stranger on the street, like, I'd probably get beat up in a fight because I can't really fight, but I'm going to have to do something about that. But I want her to feel like there was no other woman, there was no other hobby, there was no other thing or pursuit other than Christ that he chose over me. And when it was Christ over me, it was always for our blessing and our good of our family. That when we put Christ first, that always rains down good. When we put golf first or sporting events or money, it doesn't rain down good. So how can Christ be number one? Well, it'll always bless those that come after it. So I would hope that she would be able to say, he was a good leader of our home. And yeah, he just always put me first. He wanted to be with me. He found me attractive. He found like his standard of beauty was me. He wanted to be with me. He chased after me. I hope we're still flirting. I hope I'm still pinching her butt in the kitchen when we're in our 60s and 70s and 80s, Lord willing. That like I want her to still feel that I desire her and want to be with her, and that I'm happy as a lark, just the two of us, you know?
Let me ask you a question. I want to flip the script on you a little bit because you and I, if there's any two guys that know women, it's us. I mean, there's no doubt about that, right? I mean, let's just face
Luckily, our wives don't listen to this.
They don't ever watch. I don't even think they know that we have a show.
This is the Easter egg that we're planning for them right now.
That's right. But there's no two guys that know women better than us. 100%. Let's just go with that for a moment. What does it look like, or how does it make our wives or our spouses feel when we don't do what we're talking about? What do we see in them as far as their response? How can we expect them to respond to us if we aren't providing that thing, doing that thing that is serving them?
Yeah, I mean, what the best way I can put it is you almost like you see the flower start to shrivel up and die.
Good point.
It's the scriptures talk about your wife as delicate china that is beautiful, that is radiant, that is honorable to like have, but that it's delicate and breakable.
Yeah.
And most men are bulls. And so it's like, you give us the flower, we kill it. You give us the china saucer, we break it, we chip it. And honestly, that's what a lot of marriages look like at times. And so I think it's keeping the garden watered, so to speak. It's being there. I think there's a lot of emotional vulnerability that has to come in to ask, how are you doing? My wife and I are celebrating our 13th anniversary this weekend. And one of the things we'll do is a state of the marriage. And I initiate that. I say, I want to know.
What does that mean?
I want to know, what were the highlights from this past year?
Okay.
What were the difficulties, the speed bumps, the challenges? What is something that you are most grateful for this past year? Not from our family and our kids, from our marriage. And then what are your hopes and dreams for this next year? Not 10 years, not 30. Like, what do you want to do? And
I love that.
That's some stuff in our home, like I hope we redo our bathroom. That's fun to talk about. Yeah. But also, like, I hope we grow in this way. And I hope we do that. I initiated that because I want to have those detailed conversations. I want her to be able to say, yeah, speed bump this year was when you did this, or a disappointment was when you did this, so that maybe I have a chance to repent or to say, yeah, I'm sorry. By God's grace, I couldn't really come up with a ton, so praise God for that. Yeah. But I think that's because we try and keep a short account. So that for me is just being really intentional with her, setting the pace. She's more of an introverted person. So I actually have to bring that more out of her. Where some guys, it's like, nope, my wife's going to bring it. Don't worry. I don't have to prompt. She'll bring all of it. But like for our relational health, I got to bring that out of her. And if I want her to say that at the end of our days, I'm going to have to draw that out of her.
I love what you said about the garden. And I look at that from another perspective as well, to kind of piggyback on what you said. As far as my wife standing in front of my casket, whatever it might be, I want her to also be able to recognize or be able to say that I was the one that weeded the garden. What does that mean? I want to be the one that protects. So I want to keep the weeds out of the garden. The people who don't belong in our lives, it's our job to make sure that they're not in our lives, that they're not infiltrating something that is good.
Yeah, good boundaries.
We create those boundaries. And when it does enter, it's our job as men to be able to pluck that weed, pull it out, and throw it in the trash, throw it in the woods where it belongs, right? And so to keep that garden clean and pure and holy is something that I want to be able to provide that safe space, or we want to provide that safe space for our spouse. And so that would mean an awful lot to me as well. But I love what you just said about that.
And a garden analogy is perfect because there's a season for everything.
Sure.
And you're constantly working it. It never stops.
You're right.
There's a harvest season, and then harvest season is done, and it sits fallow for a little bit. But then there's a replanting season, and there's the tilling season, then there's the watering season, and the weeding season. It doesn't stop.
It's a continuous investment, and you're always doing something, and it is cyclical, right? You're repeating that cycle, and hopefully, as men, we're getting better and better at it each time around, right?
Yeah, you should be making less mistakes. I laugh at the things I thought were okay in the beginning of our marriage, the things I said that I'm like, you idiot.
Yeah.
That guy, had I got hit by a bus, my wife in year 1 or 2 might have just been like, well, whew, I dodged a bullet. I can go get a different one because what was I thinking, kind of thing. That now, hopefully, she's been married to many men. All of them were me.
Right.
But they're just been different versions of me, kind of thing.
What a great example. You're absolutely right. I look back on my earlier days and I can cringe at myself and say, gosh, I'm very sorry for that person that I was, but you have helped me grow. Christ has helped me grow. And together we have come through many things, difficult challenges, and enjoyed many hilltop performances
there's more,
as
well. As it goes on, I think there's far more hilltops than the valleys.
Yes.
But that's because they're fought for.
Right.
And stuff.
Yes, exactly. And we hope for our spouses that they remember those hilltops so much more prominently than those valleys.
That's why the first question I ask in our state of the marriage is, what were your highlights of this year?
Yeah.
Versus, let's talk about the negative right away.
Yeah.
It's like, no, what's the wins? But we both have 2 kids. We both have tenacious daughters who are strong leaders who, in so many ways, our daughters we have very similar children. That I'm confident your daughter, if she wanted to, could take over the world. And I'm confident my daughter will probably take over the world, hopefully benevolently, hopefully good. But they know who they are. They know who they want to be. And then we have sons that are more quiet, more reserved, maybe a little bit more tenderhearted. They're definitely more their mama's kid.
Yeah.
And so they're very similar, but we have a good relationship with our kids. Mine are 9 and turning 6. Yours are 23,
20, almost 24 and 21 almost.
So different age ranges.
Right.
But let's say this is down the line. They're grown. Lord willing, we pass when they're adults kind of thing. What do you want your kids to say about you?
Boy, that's a tough one. That one can kind of get emotional, can't it? I mean,
if it's okay to cry, because that's where like the wife, it's like there's something about like, yeah, we were together, but the kids, it's like, oh man, if they said this about me, it would mean the world.
Right. And your kids, when I talked about legacy,
that's everything.
They are your legacy. They are what you leave behind, and they are the example for who you were as a father, as a friend, as a Christ-driven individual for them in their lives, and they represent you going forward. You know, it's not the name on the front, or it's not the name on the back, it's the name on the front kind of thing, you know? And so when I think about them, I feel like I've accomplished my biggest goal, and that was to bring them or lead them to Christ.
Amen.
And if I can do nothing more, if I have a terrible relationship with my children, I hope at least I was able to lead them and show them the pathway to Christ, share the gospel with them so that they understand that it was meant for them, and they are meant to serve, and they are good, and they are purposeful, and they have the ability to love and be loved. And so those things are good for me. I always loved. We all have these dad sayings, right? These dadisms, or whatever you want to call it, when our kids are growing up, things we say over and over again that our kids say, oh my gosh, he's doing it. He's saying it again. Well, one of the things that I said often in our house is I want you to do 3 things. There's 3 rules in our house. Number 1 is have fun. Because if we're not having fun, what's the point, right? When we're having fun, we need to do our best. Always do your best. And number 3, whatever we're doing, honor God. And when we do those things, it all comes together for us, and then we represent the gospel. And so I feel like I've accomplished that with them. I was able to witness my son come to Christ. I was there at the moment that happened, and it was one of the most powerful out-of-body experiences I've ever gone through in my life, and I felt like, yes, I've arrived as a father. And as a servant of Christ, too. My daughter, I wasn't there for that, but I got to see it take place, and I get to continue watch it develop, and her faith and her fire and brimstone that supports it is just, it's tenacious.
It's firm. Yeah.
And it is immovable. Whereas maybe 3-4 years ago, you know, she was kind of at that tipping point. But to watch her grow as an adult, from a young lady to a woman, has been absolutely wonderful in the way that she has grown in her spirituality. And I love that. And I feel like I've made that accomplishment. My wife and I together, that is something that is tremendous. How about you? I asked the same question for you.
For my son, I want him to be able to say, he showed me what it meant to be a man. And for my daughter, I want her to be able to say, he set the standard for what it meant to be a man. So I want my daughter to have a hard time. And you live this out. Like, your son-in-law is an amazing man. I got to do their wedding. Like, I think the world of your son-in-law, and I know you do as well.
Sure.
He's a good man in a day and age that it's hard to find good men.
Right.
But that's because you also set that standard.
Right.
And I want that for my daughter. I want her to be like, look, I've seen my dad woo my mom, pursue her, be a great husband, speak well, protect our home, weed the garden, you know, like all these things. I'm not settling for some chump. Like, I want something good. Like, I always tell people, don't marry dumb. Like, because dumb doesn't grow smarter. You can marry a puppy, they grow into a dog, but like, don't marry dumb. So I want her to be able to say, you know, that he set the example. And I want my son to be able to say for sure, like, he showed me what it meant to be a man. And I don't mean that we have the same personality type. I can already see we don't.
I understand.
And I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need a little mini me as a son. I don't have this like fantasy of like, well, he'll be a pastor and he'll do.
Right.
In fact, that'd be great if neither of my kids went into pastoral ministry. But I want him to be able to say, he showed me what it meant to be a man that loved Jesus, that was passionate about his faith, that protected people, that looked to serve other people,
That loved his wife.
that gave his life away, that worked hard, that provided. I think it's important for men to provide financially, like a home, that gave his family freedom, that he worked really hard. And then I want them both to be able to say, he was my greatest confidant. I want, when my kids have a hard week, I hope and I pray they call me, because I hope they know I'll listen to them. Hope they know I'll pray for them, both then and when we get off the phone and in the future. And I hope that they think of me as wise to give me advice and to give them advice and counsel. I hope my daughter can say, Dad, I'm dating this boy and he's doing this and I don't know what to do. And she trusts me with that, because that's not always the case for fathers and daughters. And I hope my son, same thing. Dad, I've been dating this girl, and is it time to pop the question? Or Dad, I'm thinking about buying a house. Can you look over the financials? Dad, I'm gutting my bathroom. Can you help me do this? Like, I want my kids to be able to say, no matter the issue, I called my dad. So often people call their parents. Dad picks up the phone. It's like, hey, how you doing? Well, good, Dad. How are you? Good. Well, let me get your mom on the phone here. And they have no relationship with their father.
That bonding.
That would kill me.
Yeah, me too.
And so I want my kids to be able to say, and I will pursue that with my kids, especially as they continue to get more age appropriate. But I want them to be able to say, yeah, when I had a hard issue, I didn't just go to mom. Now, I hope they go to my wife. She's very wise, and she's actually more loving than I am. And she's things
nurturing.
Yes. She's the port in the storm for our family. But I hope they know, like, hey, when I needed wisdom from God's word, when I needed, and that Dad didn't just give me what he thought was best for me. He pointed me to what does God say in the matter? It's what I tell Elsie all the time, because they're still young. So if you ask them if they're Christians, they are, because they're in our home and stuff. But I know they're going to have to make that choice for themselves.
Right.
But I tell her all the time, I'm like, Mom and I chose to follow Jesus. You got to make your own choice. And she's like, well, I have. I'm like, I hope you do. You got to make that choice for yourself. Right. All I can do is give you the best example, give you the best apologetic, why I think Jesus Christ got out of the grave and what that is. But I want her to see that it's like, I'm not just kind of apathetic towards it. I'm trying to give her wisdom and counsel. She'll have to make her own choice. And there's going to be times where she makes choices I disagree with. Yeah. And same thing with my son. But I hope at the end of my days, they say, like, man, my dad was smart. I hope. This sounds horrible, but I hope when I pass, they're like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, he was my confidant. He's where I got wisdom and information from. Like, I hope there's that sense of loss, because that means I did what I was supposed to do. Because Christ can always fill in for that. And Lord willing, I'll be old enough that it's like, now it's time for you to be that person.
Right. And we recognize too, as fathers, as every father should, that the goals for our daughters versus our sons is different. We're asking and hoping for different things from them, because 100%. They each function differently. They're going to operate differently. There's going to be different things that are expected from them, not just in their families, but in their work life and their social hour, where they're going to have to stand up for something. And it's going to be a little bit different take for both of them.
I have much higher expectations for my son.
Talk about that. What do you mean?
I expect him to die for his family, because that's the call. My wife is called to, Elsie, should she choose to be married or something, is called to surrender herself, to humble herself, to serve her family and give it away. Paul says the expectations for husbands is death to self.
Right.
It is also, I believe that men can cause the most havoc. So passive men cause havoc. You and I agree on this. Like, and so when you're pornified, or you're an alcoholic, or you're abusive, or your tongue is out of control, that you will just wreak havoc on your family in a unique and horrific way. And so in that way, and this isn't a personality type. This isn't like, I need you to be type A, buttoned up, James Bond. Nope. Yeah. This is a surrender to Jesus type, that I have this expectation. I don't care if you get married. I don't care if you're a bachelor your whole life. I don't care, that you would be a leader that would serve others, and that you would undo the curse of like what men have wrought on this earth. For Elsie, it's just not as realistic for her. And I still, you already heard me say, I think she's a leader. She could take over, but like for her, I hope that it's maybe unfair for Lincoln, but it's like, she's happy. I hope she finds a stable family. I hope she finds a man that loves her well and that kind of thing. Or she doesn't get married. She finds a career in a thing she's passionate about to give her life away. But I think the calling for men is really high. And so for my son, it's like, sorry, my dude, I didn't set it. Like, I think God made the calling for men high.
Right. That's the bar. It's not what dad expects. It's what the
and it's
father
what I try and live out too.
Right.
I'm not calling you to something that like, I'm trying to give it away. And so hopefully he just sees that and it's instinctive of like, yeah, that's what we do. This is going to sound stupid, but I already do this. Like when we go on a walk in the woods, I'll tell my son, I'm like, all right, Lincoln, when a bear comes out, I go after it first. And then if the bear takes me out, you're up next. And then if you go down, then it's mom. And then it's Elsie. And he's like, well, no, I'm not ready. And I'm like, I'm sorry, buddy. The men go down, the women go free. Like, that's just the way it is. And it's silly. And he's 5. And he's like, I don't want to fight a bear. And he's like, Mom, you have to go fight the bear, kind of thing. But it's like, I want him to have that reality of like, women and children first. This is the Titanic rule. Like, right. Your mom and your sister go free. You and I go down if we have to, because we're called to give our life away.
That's a great point. Yep, absolutely. I love that. So when we talked about wives, we talked about kids. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about friendships, our relationships, and what we would want our closest confidants to say about us. What does that look like for you?
That's where it really does pivot, because like the relationship with wife and kid is so personal and so emotional even. Friends, I hope, it sounds generic, but I just hope they say he was a good friend. And what I mean by that is was available, listened, cared, like a good friend. Mm-hmm. And then for this one, it is very specific. I hope they say he was always about Christ, and I knew I could go to him with spiritual things. I try and be a well-rounded person that, like, if you and I talk, we can talk about football, and I don't have to end it with like, and well, Steve, did you know in Romans 12 that that's weird. Right. Like Christ is the number one thing in my life, but I have a lot of other passions and stuff like that.
That's not an organic conversation.
Exactly. We talk a lot about scripture too, and we talk about these things, but like, I want to have holistic friendships, and we'll talk about friendships in a later podcast episode. But I hope that my friends say he kept Christ in the midst of our friendship, and that I knew I could go to him. And I've experienced that with a lot of my friends, that they know, maybe even they're not believers, but they know maybe there's something different about me, hopefully in a good way, of like, maybe I can talk with him about this thing that's really hard or really serious.
Right.
And just as easy as we could talk about the Buckeyes, I can then talk to him about my marriage that's falling apart.
Right.
And so I hope that my friends would say that.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And that friendship thing, you're right. We'll talk about that on another podcast, but that friendship thing is more about, hey, you want to be recognized as a guy who loved his family, the guy that supported his family financially, that was bound or rooted deeply in Christ and the church, served the community. How did you do that? How did you provide opportunity, security, offerings back to others outside of your four walls? What did that service look like? And so I think that's very real for me. And that's probably an area where I struggle a little bit, and probably one of the reasons why, this just sound like a shameless plug, but why I also wrote a book, because I wanted to be able to give back to somebody, leave something behind that was somewhat tangible, that people could recognize that, hey, this is I'm giving a piece of me to you, and maybe it helps you in some sort of way. And I keep looking for ways to find that. And I hope that's recognized by my friends, that they would be able to say that. And that's an area where I struggle. I don't always find the best ways to give back to the community, but my intentions are good, and I'm trying and thinking of new ways to do that and glean from that. But those are real challenges for me. So
if you had to Do you feel like there's any tweaks you could make? So we're talking about reverse engineering
Mm-hmm.
that like you might, because I feel the most pressure right now with my kids because I feel like I'm in the wet cement stage still.
Okay.
Where you probably are like, man, my kid's house is kind of built. If I miswired it, we're gonna have sparks at this point.
Exactly.
Like, kind of
Exactly.
So I feel the most pressure there. Do you think you, as you kind of examine this, you might feel the most pressure of like reverse engineering with friendships of like, how do I continue to build those deeply and richly throughout the rest of my days?
Yeah, I think where I've gone with this is, you know, we all gauge ourselves by our social media, right? Or a lot of people gauge themselves by the social media. I have 800 friends on Facebook, and this many people follow me on Instagram, and I rethink that, and I say, you know, I want to impact 2-3 people, and who are those closest individuals that I want to impact? Because here's what happens, Craig. Maybe I provide something to them, but that leveling up might not be recognized immediately with them. In other words, they might see something in me, try to put it in as an example, but maybe they provide that to their children, and their kid gleans from that more so and runs with it in some way. So maybe in some indirect way, I've impacted an individual. While it might not be that immediate friend, maybe it's their child, or maybe it's a friend of friend, or maybe it's an uncle or a cousin down the road. And so those things are valuable to me as I think about, what can I say in a certain moment? What would I want somebody to say about me as I impact others positively, because I think we all impact people.
Yeah, it can be.
Some better than others, right?
That kind of goes in what we had talked pre-show about what we wanted to share. And you had some things that you hope are not said at your funeral, which is good, because I think we both have some, because I've heard some doozies at a funeral. I heard a child say, my dad never said he loved me, and I don't know why. That's a horrific thing to have said. And then they said, I know he did, but he just never said it. And I'll always take that. And they were sitting there, we were planning Dad's funeral, and it just came out. And it was like, wow, hope that's never said about me.
Yeah.
Obviously won't be said about either of us. Our kids have heard that. But what do you hope is not said about you?
Yeah, I've got a few
funeral?
things, you know, and it's going to sound kind of unusual and maybe in some ways kind of trite, but it's some things that are said often at funerals. And I've heard people get up and give eulogies and say that, you know, he provided time for everyone. And I can't honestly say that is a target goal of mine, because I think that as followers of Christ, I'm not sure, and I don't want this to sound, let's talk about this after I say it, because this is going to require some explanation. I'm not sure everyone is worthy of your time to a certain degree,
or
right?
Investment.
That's probably a better conversation.
Everyone's worthy of your kindness, looking in the eye, but
exactly. Investment, not so. And so I'm not investing in everybody, because those who don't receive it well, I'm okay with that. I want to take that and invest it into those who really embrace it and want to run with it.
You have limited time. You don't want to waste it.
Exactly. So I want to impact as many people as I can positively. And in order to do so, I need to kind of sift through that a little bit, right? I need to weed that garden. Yeah, exactly. So that's one of them. And then I've heard other people say, you know, he was liked by everyone. I struggle with that, because if you're liked by everyone, then the chances are you probably stood for nothing.
Amen.
And if you take a stand, whether it's faith-based, whether it's, and hopefully it is faith-based, right?
Could just be, but honestly, work ethic-based.
Certainly, lots of different things.
If you call employees, the people you manage, to a standard of effort, people aren't going to like that.
Right. I don't want or need to be liked by everyone, because if that's the case, I didn't stand for much. I would much rather prefer, hey, Steve wasn't for everybody. I would much rather prefer that. And that's something that I've shared with my wife and with my kids. I say, I'm not for everyone. And I'm not. And I don't intend to be. And that's not to be mean or disrespectful to others. It's just
not because you're going around flipping people the bird.
I'm not doing that. Not that they see anyway.
It's the number one.
Exactly. No, I don't do that. But
yeah, it's not that you're going out to try and make enemies. It's that as you live authentically to who you are, there will be some who find it attractive and some who do not.
right.
Yeah, because you're not milquetoast and you have actual opinions, have actual views on things of eternal importance and on things of earthly importance that is you're not going to bend on.
Yeah, and so when people say, you know, hey, you're upsetting a few people, okay, I expect that. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, sometimes if what is the old saying? If you want everyone to like you, sell ice cream.
Oh yeah,
like it, but we say it as don't be a pastor. Like if you want everyone to like you, don't be a pastor. Sell ice cream.
You shared something with me before the show as well. You had something in mind that was just something you did not want to hear.
One of my things that it just makes my skin crawl is the like, well, they're one of God's angels now. And it sounds silly, and this isn't. If you've said that, just know humans aren't angels. Angels aren't humans. They're different. And if you believe the scriptures, so you might think, well, I don't believe in any of that. That's fine. You obviously believe in humans. But like, if you believe in the scriptures that angels are created beings different from humans in the same way dogs are different than cats.
Yes.
And so when a dog dies, we don't say, well, he's gone and now becomes a cat. and so it's in that same way. But because we're so uncomfortable with death, I don't need to be an angel. Jesus Christ was man. I want to stay in the form that God came in. Don't change me. I will be changed in a sinless way and without a body, but I don't need. Don't say he's one of God's angels. I hope that people also don't say that he was good for a season, but it just kind of tapered off. Like, and I know
great freshman year, but he couldn't follow up.
I know no one would say that at a funeral, but maybe it's just I hope no one thinks it. Like that the like
what does that mean? Like you didn't reach your potential? Is that where you're going with that?
Or like maybe the thing I hope they don't say is, boy, he really loved retirement. He just kind of did his own thing. I'm not sure Christians should have much of a retirement. And that, hear what I mean in that. Of like, I stopped serving the church.
Right.
I might stop serving the church and move into a volunteer role.
Right.
But if I'm called to teach and preach, I hope I keep teaching and preaching. If I'm called to serve, I hope I keep serving. If I'm called to mow the lawn, I hope I keep mowing the lawn. And there can be this mindset, and people too, that he loved his golden years. And what they really mean is they got really selfish towards the end.
Yeah.
I really hope that that's not said of me. That it's like, yeah, or could be said of me that like, yeah, once Greg hit 65, he just kind of kicked back and didn't do anything anymore.
Yeah, I think that goes to my thought. I think that we live in that moment, right? The moment is now. What are you going to do with it? Versus, hey, I can't wait till I retire, and then you lose that time, and you lose the people that are around you.
Well, and the truth is, many of us. Retirement's a fickle thing anymore in this economy and in this world. I don't really know what that looks like. And so live the life you want to live now.
Right.
And again, prioritize different things. If you're like, but I want to travel, well, figure out how to travel now. I don't know what that looks like. And you might be like, well, I just won't. I am confident that you and Jill are in a better financial position now than you were 35 years ago when your kids were young and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It's just the reality that there are more access to funds as you age if you've been a wise steward.
Sure.
That happens.
And there's fewer kids on the payroll.
Exactly. You're not paying ballet and dance classes anymore and all that stuff. But there's still the reality of don't put off like living. Don't put off doing what you're supposed to do. Don't put off doing what God. So I don't want people to say that. Like he just kind of checked out. Yeah, great freshman year, Zion Williams. He was awesome. We thought he was the wonderkin, and then just kind of
junior and senior year he disappeared.
Yeah, he just kind of checked out, or he just checked out. He just didn't care. And it's like I don't know that I'll be a pastor for my whole career. That's a vocation. Vocations change, but I hope that I'm able to still serve the church and be in the thick of it.
Right.
And go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think too. What we're saying here ultimately is. We shouldn't be apologizing for being men because there's much responsibility from God put on men to perform, to do things that we are required to do. And Paul tells us that. So if we turn away from that, if we turn our backs from that, we apologize for being a man and we change and say, okay, I need to go this direction. I need to be more feeling. I need to be more toward like my wife. Well, that's not our job. That is their role, structurally and strategically developed specifically for them. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about being a man, that's not a machismo thing. It's talking about being it's about being a man versus a guy. Mm-hmm. Don't be a guy.
Like what are the boy that can shave?
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have this, is because most men don't consider what they want set at the end of their life. Most guys our age, and I'll welcome you to my age, us young men, they are focused on hobbies. They're focused on money. Mm-hmm. A lot of them have really poor physical health, so they're not thinking about that, and they're just kind of floating. And so if you ask them, what do you want your kids to say about you at your funeral? They'd be like, good dad, I guess. Well, are you a good dad? Well, it's like, so I thought it's again, a creative way to get our listeners thinking of like, no, seriously, think about that for a second. Right. What do you want people to say? I told you before the show, I have a death chart. People think it's weird. It is a row of, a poster with 80 rows, top to bottom, numbered 1 through 80. And then in each row, there's 52 boxes representing each week of the year. So there's 52 boxes in my 35th year that I'm currently filling up. And then I'll be on to my 36th row and fill up those boxes. And it ends at 80 because that's about the average lifespan. It's actually a little less for men right now. And so I think about this stuff all the time because, again, if we don't start with the end goal in mind, who are we called to be? We will not arrive there. The old saying, you will never get to the destination you didn't set out for. You won't just someday arrive at the person you weren't striving to be yesterday. Mm-hmm. Physical health, money, job success, you just won't. And so many guys realize when it's too late. You see this with grandparents. Why do grandparents sometimes overdo it with their grandkids? They're trying to make up for the misses they had with their kids. And so they're trying, or they're over the top trying to rebuild a relationship that their kids are like, I'm not really interested. You could have had my whole childhood when I was. You weren't really there. Right. I'm doing my own thing. We have to do it now.
Right. It's interesting you say that. And I think you recognize that uniquely for somebody in your mid-30s versus many others, because you mentioned that the focus is often on finance. It's often on golf. It's often on your hobbies or travel. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's on work.
Yeah.
Trying to climb the corporate ladder or whatever that means. But I can speak from my perspective that there becomes a shift in that perspective. And I don't know when that took place for me, but it wasn't all that long ago, I'll tell you that, where those things shifted from things to now the focus for me is on time.
Yeah.
Time.
It's the only commodity you can't get more of.
It's the only thing that I can't get more of, but I need it. And I need to use it wisely. Mm-hmm. And how do I use that as an investment in my wife, in my kids, in my community? And so, I'll bring it back full circle. What do I want somebody to say about me in my funeral? He used his time wisely.
Yeah.
He invested it in people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you had 80 years. You used them well.
Right.
Well, this was a good episode. I hope that you, as listeners or watchers, we do have this up on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. If you listen to podcasts on anything other than Apple, Google, or Spotify, well, good for you. You also have our Podbean website, so you can go on there.
You can take us global, baby.
Yeah, and then
global.
We've also we put up the videos on our YouTube page, State Line Collective, over on YouTube. There's also on Facebook. We will continue to put these up on podcasts so that people can listen in the car, they can, as they're exercising, that kind of thing, because no one loves to exercise without Stephen Craig in their ears.
That's right.
And talk of death.
That's right. These are fascinating topics. But, Stephen Craig and the Book of Revelation.
Exactly. So we hope you got something out of this. Make yourself a death chart. Figure out what you want people to say at your funeral, and we'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.